Hello again, AP Econ students. This is Mr. Heel, and we're going to be going through Mod 76, all about public goods. But it's not all about public goods. We'll also talk about private goods. But the purpose of the module is really to show that only private goods can be efficiently exchanged in a market. When goods are either non-excludable, non-rival, or both, a market will fail to provide the efficient quantity and price. And so here are the objectives. I think you can read that on your own. But let me just talk some about the concepts for the module, the economic concepts, the key ones anyway. Private goods such as cars and clothing, etc. If they are excludable and rival, they can be efficiently exchanged in a market. Public goods like fire protection, national defense, police, etc. Are non-excludable and non-rival, and markets are unlikely to provide must be provided by the government. Again, markets are unlikely to provide them, so the government must step in to provide them. Artificially scarce goods like pay-per-view movies, etc. are excludable and non-rival. We'll talk about that because suppliers can exclude consumers by charging a price above zero. Less than the efficient amount, obviously, will be consumed because of that. Common resources like clean water, fish in the ocean, etc., those are non-excludable and rival, and will be overused unless government is able to assign property rights or require some users of the resource to pay prices that reflect the entire cost of their consumption. So that's what sort of the things we're going to deal with, and we'll start out talking about private goods, but really we're dealing here with a series of characteristics of goods, okay? Of course, we've talked so far to this point in our studies of markets and goods and services, so really all about private goods. We haven't really talked much about public goods. Okay, markets exist for goods like coffee and cars and Snickers and those kinds of things because they're excludable and rival in consumption. There are some goods and services like lighthouses and the cops for which markets do not and could not exist. Okay, so that's the key difference here. And so let's talk about the characteristics of some of these goods, like the private goods. Okay, so first off, they are excludable. Suppliers of the good can prevent people who don't pay from consuming it. So that's what that means. And they're also rival in consumption. The same unit of the good cannot be consumed by more than one person at the same time. So let me give an example. A car dealership sells a car to Susky at a price of 20 grand. Susky gets the car because he is willing and able to pay the price. It's on his personal demand schedule. The seller does not sell a car to Ashley because Ashley considers the price to be out of her budget. The car is excludable. This means that the seller does not have to provide a car to Ashley or the rest of the people in town who are unwilling and unable to pay the going price. Only Susky has purchased the car. The car is his. In other words, he has consumed the unit of that good and thus prevents somebody else from buying it off the car lot, right? Of course, Susky could give it to someone else to ride or sell the used if Ashley wants to buy it used. But once he sells it to Ashley, it now belongs to Ashley. Tom cannot sell it to Ashley and to JP, as an example, right? So that's sort of public goods or private goods. What about public goods? Okay, they lack those characteristics I just defined. They lack them. In other words, they're non-excludable and non-rival in consumption. So, for instance, cities that have fire departments that protect all homes in the cities and can't exclude anyone on the basis of payment, right? That's important. And more than one person can consume the fire protection at the same time. So if a fire breaks out at Ashley's house, the fire department rushes in to put it out. Sorry, Ashley. This prevents the fire from spreading to Belle's house or Belle's store, right? And so both people are consuming the same unit of fire protection, right? And so just note, you could say, well, yeah, so what if a person's rich enough to hire their own police force and they'll have their own police on his property? Well, okay, there's a distinction between pure private and pure public goods. So just stay in the box here, and that the AP guys probably won't trip you up. But in other words, if a good is primary, excludable, and rival, but there are certain rare scenarios like the one I just described that could be dreamt up by students, you guys, but you would still put that safely in the category of a private good, okay? So anyway, let's go to something called artificially scarce goods, more characteristics of goods. These are goods that are excludable and non-rival in consumption. That's the other example here would be, you guys may be taking a college econ lecture, and it's excludable because only students who have paid tuition can enroll in the course and attend the lecture. However, it's going to be non-rival because many people can consume the same unit of the good at the same time. Other examples, which we'll talk about, are like pay-per-view movies or sporting events. So those are artificially scarce goods that are excludable and non-rival. What about common resources? These are non-excludable but rival in consumption. So the fishery, the salmon fishery in the Pacific Ocean, has historically been a common resource. If a person had a boat, they could harvest salmon from the ocean, even scoop the fish out from the bank of a river as the salmon head upstream. This has made the salmon non-excludable. However, once a salmon is caught, it cannot be caught by a second person, which makes it rival. Okay, so we'll see that this combination of characters makes for a difficult situation for common resources like salmon. Okay, let's talk about then markets and how they really only provide for efficiencies with private goods. All right, so let's go back to the car dealership, right? I'm just going to use different names. So let's suppose our car dealers were selling cars to people like Tom and charging $20,000. It was also required to give cars away, to people like Huck and Becky, right? So people like Tom are going to be charged $20K, but also they get required to give cars away to people like Huck and Becky for whatever reason. So it wouldn't take long for people like Tom to realize that he could get a car and not pay for it, right? So free riders are people who receive the benefit from a good and don't pay for it. Now, another example is a large fireworks display, right? So a company that, like the Garucci brothers, an aspiring entrepreneur and private tech enthusiast, they come up with a great idea. He's going to purchase a lot of fireworks and shoot them off on the night of July 4th from a barge in the Ohio River town of Sandusky. He will recoup his cost by charging $5 for people to have a seat in his grandstand. So his venture is going to fail because the rational people of Sandusky will realize that they can sit on their own front lawns and enjoy the fireworks at no charge. Large-scale free-riding behavior will doom this firm, and no market will emerge to provide these services. So with public goods, the non-excludable nature of the goods and free riding will prevent the efficient quantity from being produced in a market. And there may not be any units produced at all. What about artificially scarce goods like pay-per-view college football games or movies offered for purchase by DirecTV, right? So this good, they are excludable but non-rival. Right, so the marginal cost of offering the football game, for example, is to the next consumer is effectively zero. So the efficient quantity in the market would be where the marginal benefit to the next consumer falls to zero. Thus, the efficient price is zero. Right, marginal analysis. Suppose DirecTV is offering a pay-per-view football game at a price of $10. Because this is greater than zero, fewer consumers will purchase the game, and so the actual number of units consumed is less than the efficient quantity. Really super important, right? What about private goods like cars and coffee and Snickers, right? Because these goods are excludable, firms can charge a price and thus have an incentive to produce them. Because these goods are rival, consumers can have an incentive to pay a positive price for them. So if a firm has an incentive to offer a good at a price above zero, and there are enough consumers that they're willing and able to pay a market price, will absolutely emerge for the good. Okay? Super important. So like public goods, though, are both non-excludable and non-rival. Because they are non-excludable, their exchange suffers from that free rider problem, and private firms will not emerge to supply them. It doesn't make sense. So how are we going to get the important public goods like national defense and environmental protection and police and disease prevention? How are we going to get those, right? So something's going to happen to provide public goods. Well, there's really only a small number of ways in which a good is supplied by private firms or by the government, right? So private firms won't supply them, so that leaves a voluntary contribution on the part of the government. So research for disease prevention is a public good that requires lots of money to provide. Some of those funds are donated by citizens or corporations, but the government must provide the rest, right? National defense is a great example of a public good that absolutely cannot survive on a voluntary donations, so the government actually provides it. How does the government provide public goods, right? By collecting involuntary taxes from the population. We know this. Okay, so what does that mean as it relates to, let's do an example where how we're trying to find how much of a public good should be provided, right? So here's an example where street lights along a city street are a public good. We're going to admit that, right? How many lights should be provided in the city? Here's the question that the city manager has to deal with. So suppose that Bob and Sandy are the only two residents, and and then they truthfully tell the government how much they'd be willing to pay for each streetlight. Again, we're doing this little situation, so bear with me. Bob and Sally, only residents, they're going to tell the government absolutely what they'd be willing to pay for each streetlight. So their WTP, or willingness to pay, is also each resident's marginal private benefit. Remember, marginal private benefit, not external. So now we're dealing with a marginal private benefit to having the next light installed. So the willingness to pay is equated to the marginal private benefit to having the next light installed. Okay, we got that? So what is the first street light worth to this town? Well, look, it's worth $10 to Bob, okay, and it's an 18 to Sandy. All right, so the first street light is worth $10 to Bob and 18 to Sandy. All right, so the total social benefit is adding those two up, right? So 28. All right, so that's, so each person, the sum of each sum of each person's willingness to pay obviously is the total marginal or total private benefit of $28. Okay, really important stuff. We know that. So the final column there just shows the marginal social cost because we got two humans. Well, how many streetlights should the town government install then, right? Well, it depends on the marginal social cost of the streetlights. If each light cost the town $12, so let's say that each light cost the town $12, right? The first 4 are going to be installed because marginal social benefit is greater than or equal to marginal social cost, right? Does that make sense? All right, the first 4 are going to do that. Boom. Does that make sense? The 5th will be inefficient, and they will not do that. Of course, it's unlikely that Bob would want to free ride on Sandy's willingness to pay, and Sandy would want to do the same. If we can get a street light without paying, wouldn't that be sort of better than paying at all, right? Well, that's not necessarily so, but there's something called common resources then. So let's sort of take a look at, common resources, okay? Pollution of fish in the sea, it's non-excludable and rival. And this creates some special problems for the use of the resource. Okay, so if we have common resources like the population of fish in the sea, right? These are non-excludable and rival, and thus they're going to create a special problem for the use of the resource, right? Other example of common resources are the oceans themselves, clean air, clean water, et cetera, et cetera. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is of overuse. Suppose I live in an area of the country that gets most of its fresh water from an aquifer. If I drill a well, I can access clean water for my own personal use. This is clearly non-excludable. Drill a well for my own personal use, it's non-excludable. However, every gallon that I pump for my own use is a gallon that someone else cannot use. It's rival. Okay? So my consumption of water draws down the water in the aquifer and makes it more difficult and costly, by the way, for other people to get their water. Now remember, in the language of economics, my marginal private cost of the next gallon of water is lower than the marginal social cost. Okay, so let me show you a graph and we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. Oops, where did it go? Oh, it's not there. Well, I'm missing a graph. Okay, well, so I won't do the graph. Anyway, so the socially optimal quantity of water, I'll just kind of describe it. So the socially optimal quantity of water is less than the market quantity of water. Maybe I can draw it. Maybe I can see if I can figure out a way to draw this thing. So let me just do that. Oh, there you go. So let's just draw something real quick and show you kind of how this works. So if I have the demand curve, looks like this. Marginal equals marginal what? Private benefit, right? And then if I have the marginal social cost, the supply curve, but then you have, or I'm sorry, that's not the supply curve. You have the supply curve here, which is the marginal private cost and private benefit, private cost. Okay, and if this is sort of the tragedy of commons, and this is something right out of the book, so I'm just kind of stealing it, but so if we talk about this, if you look at this graph, the socially optimal quantity of water then is less than the market quantity, right? It's less than the market quantity. All right, so this tells us that the common resource will be overused. Remember the previous mod, right? If rainfall is inefficient to recharge the aquifer, we're actually going to exhaust it. The same is true of common resources like fish in the ocean. Every fish that I catch provides benefit only to me. Well, at least in theory, because we'll just go with that. Just fish, while imposing a small, almost imperceptible cost on everyone else. It's just one fish. Since I don't really have to worry about those social costs, I will catch as many fish as I can. Now, when everyone is doing that, the fish can't repopulate quickly enough and fisheries collapse, right? So that's sort of the problem of overusing common resources. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's just move on then. What about sort of, what about this thing called the efficient level of artificially scarce goods? Okay, so we talked a little bit a while back about the, pay-per-view movies and are artificially scarce because they're excludable but non-rival. The cable company can exclude me from watching the movie if I don't pay the price. And if I watch the movie, it doesn't deny another household from also watching the movie. Okay? So the marginal cost of providing the movie to one more household is zero. The efficiency quantity, would be the quantity where the demand curve intersects the horizontal axis, and the price would be zero. Of course, there's no way the firm can profit if the price is zero, right? So the firm sets a price, maybe, what is it nowadays, $7.95 or something, and excludes some of the potential customers by design because it has to be profitable. So if the price is $7.95, fewer movies are going to be ordered than the efficient number. This is why the good is called artificially scarce. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Sort of when we deal with Mod 76, what have we learned? Well, hopefully we learned that externalities are what they are. And, I'm sorry, not externalities, pardon me. That I hope we've learned that when we're dealing with goods, there's characteristics of public and private goods. Private goods are excludable and rival and can be efficiently exchanged. Public school goods are non-excludable and non-rival, and markets are unlikely to provide them. Artificially scarce goods are excludable and non-rival. Common resources aren't excludable and rival. You can almost make up a nice little sort of chart to remember, and that's what I would recommend. Anyway, folks, that's Module 76. Hope that helps. Bye.